and welcome Virtual Space Hero community to another LinkedIn Live session about a topic that I got so many requests and also questions for our today's guest speaker. And I'm really happy to have him back on our stage. What are we going to talk about? It's one of the topics that has been discussed over and over in several LinkedIn groups and LinkedIn conversations here, and it's about hybrid meetings. So while in the past 2 years, many of us and many organizations have adapted to running virtual meetings, now there comes the other question and the next challenge, because many are moving back to the offices, but not all of them 100%. So we are in a hybrid organizational environment where also hybrid meetings occur. And if you look through the LinkedIn Live conversations, you see that many are saying, stop it there, no to hybrid meetings. And very likely all the facilitators will tell you no to hybrid meetings if you don't know how to properly run them. And I'll just tell you a very quick story about my first hybrid workshop that occurred like 7 years ago, when I didn't even know that it's going to be hybrid, because it was a live workshop supposed that I was running with a colleague from Slovakia in Austria for one of the major banks. It was for the leadership team, and we did an intercultural communication workshop. And when I arrived on site with my colleague, the HR manager came to me and said, like, Barbara, you know that the Turkish and the Italian colleagues, 2 of them were not able to join. So we thought that we are going to add them via Skype. And I was like, whoa. Okay, and then you can imagine what happened and how the workshop experience for those 2 connected via Skype without us having proper microphones was. At least we were 2 facilitators, so I was the one sitting beside the chat and trying to put the major messages in the chat, but still, we did not have a fantastic hybrid experience. And today I'm happy because I have on my stage again Robert Kinsley, who is connecting from Arkansas today out of Hong Kong, and he's one of the go-to hybrid experts. So let's welcome him on the Virtual Space Hero LinkedIn Live stage. Hi, Robert.
Hello, Barbara. Thank you for having me again.
Hello there, Robert. It's such a pleasure. I was already lucky that you had time in your calendar, because I know that you're currently traveling. So out of Hong Kong, you are in Arkansas, right?
Yes, and that's in the USA, because I know a lot of people have no idea where Arkansas is, nor should they, unless they've done business with Walmart.
Right, so how is it going? I know it's your first trip for the past 2 years. It's the first time that you're traveling again, and you are now diving from your virtual hybrid practices into an in-presence setting. So how is that for you, going back to those in-presence experiences?
It's very different. I mean, socially, going from Hong Kong, which still has a lot of social rules of what you can and can't do, going into the United States, where there's almost no rules at all. It's definitely a cultural shift, more than I've experienced, in the past when I've traveled back and forth from the USA to Hong Kong. But in terms of being in person for work, I'm still doing a lot virtual. I'm doing a lot of remote. I was up until 6 a.m. 2 nights ago with my clients, which you know what, I enjoy the opportunity and the flexibility to do that. But I am speaking today at the University of Arkansas with a face-to-face group, and I've made a point not to bring a single visual, not even a laptop. I'm going full analog just to thrust myself back into the old ways.
That is fantastic. Great to hear that. And yeah, well, I know that you also just recently published a fully available, online available ebook about hybrid work. And also for all of those out there, check definitely out. And I'm going to put in the banner now on nomian.com/hybrid. You can download this book full of wisdom that we're going to dive in now with Robert here on the stage. So Robert, I know that you have been running virtual and hybrid sessions for many, many years. If you think about hybrid, we know it is a setting where we have in-presence participants, but also some joining virtually, whether it's a facilitator or the participants themselves. What does hybrid mean for you if you look back at the sessions, your experience? What does it mean for you?
Well, I love that question because the world is full of different hybrid definitions and different hybrid formats. You mentioned meetings, and that is huge. That is what most businesses are doing either now or they will be doing in the near future, where there are just discussions. There's not so much a training or a facilitation element to some of these. Maybe there's a facilitation of the meeting, but in terms of workshops, skill building workshops that I often run, like presentation programs or negotiation programs. So those are two of the big differences for me. There's a hybrid meeting where there's just hybrid communication that's happening live at the same time. But then when we get into running activities and using apps or even using physical activities, when some people are face to face and some people are joining virtually, those are the two big, I think, definitions that I bounce back and forth from. However, we do have a lot of other hybrid arenas, like huge conferences where some people can watch via stream, maybe they can chat online or ask questions, but those big hybrid events don't really have the same connectivity. The face-to-face participants probably are not interacting very much with those virtual participants, and then of course we get into just hybrid work in general. How are people juggling day-to-day duties when they're working on their own, but their team is somewhere else, possibly in the office?
If you think about that, you had to design and run your first hybrid workshop. What is sort of the mentality, the approach that you used to do that?
Oh, so again, wonderful question. I'll try not to be too long here. So let me start with first the discussions that we need to have with ourselves and with whoever's asking us to organize a hybrid event. If it's a manager, if it's a client, we need to be honest with ourselves and our team of what it's going to take to actually make the hybrid meeting or hybrid workshop successful in terms of technology, in terms of additional, people and assistants and producers, in terms of just the tech cost and where is that tech coming from? Are the activities and discussions going to create some kind of equality between the different participants? Will the face-to-face people get most of the attention, or will we really allow the virtual participants to be full participants, fully interactive? This takes a lot of coordination. And honestly, the big question is, could I just run two different sessions, one face-to-face and another one virtual? That often is the best way to go. There are great times to have a hybrid workshop or a hybrid meeting, and it is necessary many times, but it's not, for me, I tell people, don't make it your go-to solution. That's really the first question to have. Then approaching it really is, I mentioned, creating some kind of equality, and I could get into that a little bit more later if you want, but can we make sure the virtual people are fully participating, not just, making sure in a virtual event, we want to make sure people are not multitasking as much as we can. But even in hybrid, that's even more true, because if the face-to-face individuals are getting all of my attention as a facilitator, I'm pretty much giving my virtual participants the cold shoulder or the permission to go multitask.
Absolutely. And the fun thing when you talk about equality, and let's pick up on this now, because we do know equality and proximity bias is something that has been discussed very intensively also in several discussions on how to overcome these challenges. I just give you one example, and I think it's so fun because it just happened the other way around. I was invited as a keynote speaker at a conference, and I was the virtual keynote speaker in a hybrid conference setup. So I saw all the other participants, the virtual ones. I saw a big camera that was going to all the participants that I saw in the room. There was a moderator in the room who welcomed me. The microphone, everything worked pretty well. And the fun thing is, I am so aware about proximity bias and how you need to be sort of involving properly and almost firstly handing over to the virtual participants so that they feel that there is no barrier for them to participate. But in my case, as I was the virtual participant, I felt much closer to the other virtual participants, and I forgot about the ones in the room. So imagine that I was really talking because I saw the names. I sometimes saw the faces of the other virtual participants, while I could not really distinguish the faces of those 200 people in the big conference room in real life, like in a conference setup, right? And it's so fun because it occurred to me the first time that I had this proximity bias, but being in the virtual space with the virtual participants.
Well, my question would be in that situation, what could the organizers or the facilitators do to help bridge that gap from your personal experience as a virtual participant? What could they have done with either their facilitation techniques or with the technology to bridge that gap between you and the in-person participants? Simply adding some cameras around the room where you could see, the room of 200, but there could be opportunities to set up smaller stations where you could see at least one table. Maybe even that would, if the technology was there and set up correctly, you could even have small group discussions as a virtual participant with some of the face-to-face participants and their physical tables.
Absolutely. And this already brings us to the setup of the room, because clearly what you're suggesting means a lot more cameras, a lot more technology needed on site. So what do we need to consider, or what would you suggest to consider in the physical hybrid training room setup? What would you consider?
Every facilitator and every team that they're working with likely has different needs, not only for the program, for the meeting, but really for the technology. It's not always necessary for a virtual participant to see every single in-person participant. However, there may be times to, like I said, set up breakout stations where maybe there are additional cameras that get turned on, but this gets really complex because those different cameras may each need a computer. Are we traveling with that? So that goes back to that big question that we have to have with our overall team. How much do we really need to make this successful, and how much is overkill? Do we need to hire an expert to even come in to set this up? So when we think about, if we want to call it a training room, there are in a lot of companies an established smart room that have cameras, they have microphones everywhere. It's all synced up. There's no audio feedback. That really is the best case scenario. We walk into a room and it's been tested for hybrid events, hybrid meetings, hybrid workshops, and we can trust that the tech is going to be working properly that day. In my case, as a third party consultant for a lot of our clients, I bring my own equipment. And I had a situation, a couple of months ago when I ran a hybrid workshop online where everything had worked before. In the hour before the event, the testing and the audio worked fine. The moment that hybrid meeting started, one of the microphones and speakers started getting echoes and feedback, and we have no idea why it started to do it at that moment, other than, Murphy's Law. Something will go wrong. So let me return to your original question about tech specifics. Yes, video, webcams, seeing the facilitator, seeing the participants or some of the participants. We have to think about that in two ways. Can the virtual people see enough of the face-to-face individuals? And do the face-to-face individuals need to see the virtual individuals? If they do, it's easy to put a Zoom screen, if we're using Zoom, for example, on a projector, on a television in the room. But then what does that do if we also have slides that we're presenting? Do we have two screens? So those are things to consider. And the major tip I have for any of these tech requirements is set it up and practice it a week in advance, and have backup plans. Really though, the big issue that we find with hybrid is the audio. The moment I start broadcasting from a separate speaker system in a face-to-face live training room, that has the potential to cause those echoes, those feedback loops. And then you think about the participants that are in the room. How are they going to be speaking into microphones? Do I have table microphones? Do I ask them to, anytime anybody speaks, pick up a microphone so the virtual people can hear? The audio really is the biggest concern with hybrid. And the moment video goes out, we can still have a discussion. The moment audio goes out, unless everybody knows sign language, which is rarely the case, the meeting's over, at least for the virtual participants.
And if you think about audio, so I'm sure also you have some suggestions. For example, I do know that many organizations, most of the companies that I work with, they started using meeting owls. And as I personally had very good experiences, that's also what I recommend, because it's a very, let's say it's a good alternative to bigger systems. I would say also economically speaking. Are there any other solutions that you would recommend for hybrid setups?
Yeah. So one thing that I found that works, especially if let's say you have some different stations around the room. Let's say every small group table has their own virtual setup. They have a laptop. They have a dedicated webcam for that small group table. They also have likely a speakerphone. Now, that speakerphone does a great job of not allowing feedback loops when that speakerphone is being used on its own. But the moment something else is broadcast from another table or from the room's overall sound system, that's where that audio starts immediately clashing. So in addition for facilitators setting that up and testing it, we have to make sure that our participants, especially the people that are face-to-face, know to mute and unmute. When they're virtual, most people are used to the mute and unmute now after 2 years of being virtual. But when they're back in that room, I actually set up little note cards and signs on the table that says mute and unmute, just because when they don't, immediately those audio issues occur. So I have to do a little bit of onboarding or reminders for some of those face-to-face participants.
But that's a great tip, a very hands-on tip, to have those signs also on the table so that participants don't forget about that. Fantastic. Robert, we were also saying, well, if, for example, you're going to these small breakout sessions, how do you deal with the virtual participants if in your session, whether it's a smaller or a bigger one, but you want to mix the in-presence and the virtual ones, you want to mix them up? Do you suggest to have computers that are taken from table to table with the corresponding virtual participant, or how do you deal with these technological issues here?
So if we take a quick step back, a lot of breakout rooms can be 100% successful when we have the face-to-face individuals only working with the face-to-face individuals, and don't mix them with the virtual participants. Let the virtual participants be in Zoom breakout rooms. Now, when we do that, we have to understand as a facilitator, let's imagine that we don't have a producer that day. If you're doing hybrid, you probably should have a producer, but let's imagine that you don't. You're going to be giving 2 sets of instructions. You're going to probably get those virtual individuals started first, because virtual communication takes slightly longer on average. Get them in those breakout rooms, give them those instructions, and then attend to the face-to-face participants because they're just live together. They can go in groups of 4 to different corners of the room or wherever. So I wanted to mention that before your question about mixing those groups. So now let's talk about mixing face-to-face participants and virtual participants in those breakout rooms. We have to go back to the logistics and making sure this is tested. If I have 4 tables in a training room, I can have 4 webcams, I can have 4 audio systems, I can have 4 face-to-face individuals and 4 virtual participants, and they can all be together on that laptop, on that screen, on that microphone. Here's the problem. When all 4 groups are in the same room, now that audio becomes an issue. Groups are loud, they get energetic. 2 groups talking next to each other if they can hear each other as face-to-face participants, not a big deal. You can ignore other people. But the moment those virtual participants start hearing the background, hearing other discussions, it's so easy for them to just give up, to just say, I'm not going to sit through this awful audio experience. So in that case, how big is the room? If we have an auditorium, we could set breakout stations up in 4 corners and we're probably okay. If we're in a simple conference room that holds 16 people, forget having 4 breakout rooms in that conference room. Now, if we need to, we can get face-to-face individuals to leave into other rooms, other annexes. Maybe there's multiple conference rooms that we can use. That's one option. Another option that I found useful, if I am in a company, working with one team, 4 breakout rooms, I might ask the face-to-face participants to simply go back to their desk, get on their personal system. They have now become virtual participants only for the breakout rooms. When those small group breakout rooms are over, the face-to-face participants come back to the main room with me. So I know I've thrown a couple of different ideas on how that could work, but that's really all I can do when somebody wants to try these things out. They're going to have to go and analyze their room, analyze the space they have, and see what might work best with a number of those, combinations or options.
Fantastic. But there are so many options, though, that we have at the end and that we didn't even realize. So thanks a lot. And I really appreciate the idea of even inviting the on-site participants to go back to their spaces, join virtually the breakout room. So maybe even they're having just virtual breakout rooms to make that smoother compared to having hybrid breakout room situations. If I don't have those 4 or 5 conference rooms or rooms that I would need to have a good audio quality still. Fantastic examples. Robert, we were already talking at the beginning, and we do know that in hybrid setups, in hybrid organizations, in hybrid teams, very often that equitably or being everybody has the same chance to participate in the meeting is one of the challenges. We were already saying, and you gave great suggestions and ideas on what the conference organizers could have done in my case, where I was the virtual speaker in a hybrid setting. What about a hybrid context in general? What would you do as a facilitator of that meeting or as a facilitator of that workshop, whatever it is, in order to have both participants equally participate in the live session?
Excellent. Again, because this is so key. The first step really is the preparation, making sure anybody, whether they're face-to-face or whether they're virtual, knows what's expected of them. If we run a virtual session, we ask everyone to be on video, if possible, making sure they have some kind of dedicated microphone or a headset. That's important for the virtual in hybrid. At the same time, some of the face-to-face participants might need to bring some equipment. Do they need a headset where they can plug into some kind of breakout station? If they need that, what happens if they don't have it, right? How do we move forward if somebody says, I don't have my laptop today, I don't have my tablet today? These are considerations, and we need to have those backup plans, or just ensure that everybody understands if you don't have your equipment with you, you simply aren't going to be part of the program today. The other thing with planning is really knowing how we like to facilitate. Just because you're virtual doesn't mean you're going to be a watcher. We're going to ask virtual individuals to speak up. We're going to ask virtual participants to use interactive apps that the face-to-face people can use at the same time. And that's really the first step, getting everybody joining, knowing they are committed no matter where they are in the world, with me or halfway around halfway around the world in an office somewhere. Now, when we get into the actual facilitation, one tip that I've heard is go virtual first. Anytime you call on an audience member, go virtual first. either take volunteers or call someone out by name, then go to somebody face to face. This not only keeps the facilitator acknowledging there are virtual participants here with me. Maybe I'm not paying as much attention to them visually because they're on a smaller screen, but if I'm going to them first, then I give them attention, but also it lets the face-to-face individuals remember we do have other colleagues joining us, and we want to have them as equals as much as possible. One tip that I do is I might sometimes put even a sign on the back wall that says "Go Virtual." Not only can I see that when I'm looking at the face-to-face participants to remind me, look down at the webcam sometimes, but it also is a great talking point for those face-to-face participants. Why is that sign there? Well, I'm doing my best to recognize the virtual individuals here today, and we're asking you to do the same. Other people have a different strategy. They say, let's go face-to-face first. If my attention over the last 2 years has been mostly virtual, some of us say my tendency is to pay attention to the people virtually because that's just what I'm used to over the last 2 years. Maybe I need to train myself to go back to the face-to-face with real personal eye contact.
That's a really interesting argument I never ever heard. Also, because we do know that proximity bias kicks in that moment, so that even though those people might believe that this is the case, that they are so virtually oriented because they have been virtual for 2 years, very often still what I see is the moment that they are in the room with other people, and even it happened to me, so I'm super fully aware of proximity bias. It happened to me. I was much closer to the virtual participants than I was to the ones in the room. Fantastic hands-on tips, Robert, really to keep us thinking about how we also help ourselves with a small sign as well as facilitators to not forget about our principles. And remote first is one of the principles of remote or hybrid organizations at the end. So thanks a lot for these tips. Go ahead.
I want to follow up with something though, because I think it's a really another valuable tip that people might find, at least on people's approach. I think this has to do with attitude and how we approach hybrid, but it also has to do with our execution of a hybrid event. It's about, when we say, treating people equally, it's often making sure individuals or certain groups of individuals do have the ability to fully participate. Let's imagine that I have 15 people face to face, but only 5 people virtually. It is okay and maybe even preferable for me to give 75% of my attention to the face-to-face participants because 75% of my participants are face-to-face, going 25% of the time back to virtual because there's only 5 of them. Now, I can probably keep track of who has or hasn't spoken in that 20-person session, but I don't necessarily want to say 50% virtual, 50% face-to-face, because if it's 75% of my attendees are with me, if I only give them half the attention, then I might be neglecting some of those individuals.
Very good point. Very good point. Thanks a lot for mentioning or adding this here as well. So let me add a few last questions. We're already running out of time as usual when I'm talking to you, because there are so many things that that you're able to share in those fantastic hands-on tips. So one thing that that you already started to mention are the apps and tech recommendations. I do know that you are one of the Prezi heroes in the room currently, because I don't use Prezi, I use app, right? But you are the Prezi hero, and also playing around with a lot of tags and apps that you can use for hybrid sessions. So if you just dive into that topic as well, I would really appreciate that.
Absolutely, and I can show you some quick examples. Now, you mentioned the app, the MMHMM. For those who don't know, we really are. We're not just having a filler word like It really is the name of the app. That's what I'm using right now for my virtual background. I'm still playing. I have a new setup right now for this today. My lighting has changed a little bit, and if you're noticing that hole that appears on my forehead sometimes. I thought I had worked that out. Now it's appearing again, but whatever. That's the fun of virtual. That's the fun of hybrid. I'm using the app now. Now, for those who've never used it, I'm going to do one quick thing. And this is just sometimes when I do an introduction in a session, I might say, where am I from? Let me show you the background of myself. Now, I know this is cut off a little bit on our screen. There we go. So I might have these virtual backgrounds. I can point to them. I can interact. Things can come up. I can talk about I'm speaking at the University of Arkansas today, whatever. That's great with virtual, but also if my face-to-face participants do have a screen, whether it's their screen on their table or whether it's just a large screen in the training room, I can use these virtual backgrounds knowing that everybody can see them. Virtual can see them, face-to-face can see them also. You mentioned Prezi. What I'm going to do is I'm going to switch over to my Prezi Video App. And this is simply, and you're going to see my traveling green screen right now. It is a little bit wrinkled, but it does do the trick. Let me go over here. So now I'm on Prezi Video here. Now, what happens is imagine that I don't have a green screen. Let's imagine that I am in a live training room and you could see, a whiteboard behind me. You could see windows, whatever. I'm in an actual office. I like Prezi Video for hybrid at times because it puts things in the foreground. Now, I can make these things in the foreground. Absolutely. Sorry, I can make them disappear. So I can be a live facilitator, face-to-face virtual. They see me as I am, and I don't always need visuals, but when I have visuals, I can turn them on. And then this is great because the virtual people can still see that live environment, but as long as the face-to-face people can see my screen, they can see anything I want. I can import these as slides. I can change things at any moment. And then, of course, I can even go with virtual backgrounds. I'm again playing with this. Now I'm using a combination of for my virtual background and Prezi for my actual foreground elements. There's a lot of complexity that we could get into with this, but once we find a system that works for us, using multiple apps, not just with our visuals, but a lot of apps for our interactions and getting our participants to push buttons and enter text, enter their ideas. It's usually, it's a wide open world. And with virtual, I do think we're going to see some new software in the next year or two that we just said, wow, this is going to change the game for some of us.
Absolutely. And I also think so. That's what I enjoyed when I read through your hybrid life guide. It is so hands-on and so practical with so many ideas and also like new tips on how to apply also these apps that, for example, I'm using app, but I never really thought about it as a tool, or Prezi, I'm not using it, but as a tool for particularly hybrid live sessions with the considerations that you were putting on the table now. So really amazing, Robert. Thank you so much for that. I'm going to add one last question, and this is a little bit about an outlook and something into the future. So if you think about the way we are meeting or the way we are socializing, do you think that this is changing now with the hybrid, and how is it changing?
This is, I'm going to give a citation here because I really recommend people who want to get into hybrid. There's a book that came out in February this year called Suddenly Hybrid. It's a follow-up to a book, Suddenly Virtual. It's by, you have it right there. Thank you. I love Suddenly Hybrid.
Karen is amazing. Yeah.
Yes. Karen Reed and Joseph Allen. The thing I love, so they focus a lot on hybrid communication in general and hybrid meetings. I know my book goes deeper, I think, into the practical setup. Like, what if you have to set up your own cameras? What might you need to do with that? So there are some differences between the books. But one thing that their book does is it includes a lot of Joseph Allen and Karen Reed's. But I know a lot of the research came from Joseph Allen. He's a PhD. And it's just deep into why is hybrid necessary? Why is hybrid working? And the reason I mentioned that book is your question was, is this changing how we're socializing, how we're communicating? For a lot of teams, it's a necessary evil. They're hybrid working. That doesn't mean they're always in a live hybrid meeting. They could be using asynchronous communication where they're uploading messages that people check throughout the day. They're uploading video briefings. Why do we need people around the world in different time zones to get into a meeting at 9 a.m. Monday morning, and for some people it's 5 p.m. We could upload videos if we wanted to, if we trust our colleagues to watch those videos, to reply with their own videos or messages. So when we talk about hybrid, using a lot of different work styles on different time zones can actually reduce the need for us to meet live. When we are meeting live, though, hybrid, I don't know if I've seen it really changing how people are. I know it's changing how people work together. Is it are people choosing that as an option? That's the question I'm thinking about. A lot of people know hybrid is difficult, and unless the tech is set up and unless they're comfortable with it, most people still choose to do face-to-face or virtual. I was working with a nonprofit just about 2 hours ago. I was talking with them. They wanted to have a face-to-face meeting in Hong Kong. There are some group government restrictions on how big groups can be. So they said, well, we can make this hybrid. And I mentioned, if you're going to set up a laptop and just stream it, nobody wants to watch that. You're going to need that dedicated eye-level webcam. You're going to need the speakers with dedicated microphones, not just setting up a laptop. And even if you set up that technology, how are the virtual people going to participate at all? Or are they literally just going to be watchers? Now, you and I streaming this right now has so much value for people watching, but we're not asking them to be vocal participants in this meeting. That's the problem. If I have 10 people here and we say we're going to be vocal participants, but those virtual people are just neglected, that's really that consideration. It's going to take a lot of effort to do it right. So unless you have somebody willing to go through all of that effort, just do it face to face. We don't need to always have virtual participants.
I think anyways that it's my message to organizations is always that they really need to dive into it, and I think there is no way around it. So as all the organizations are now trying to set up their hybrid processes, hybrid structures, hybrid rules and regulations that they're going to have, whatever they look like, hybrid meetings at some point they will need to be able to manage that. And I think so, therefore, why not try already now and really dive into the topic? And I think in your hybrid life guide and also in the fantastic book from Karin and Joe, there are so many fantastic suggestions that you will be able to manage a hybrid meeting effectively, and that people really get out and say like, well, that was really a good meeting, and they don't get frustrated. And your book really also, Robert, thank you so much for that. I'm going to share again in a bit the link so that everybody can download it as well here and check out Nomium resources. On Nomium is also the Radically Remote Toolkit online there from Joshua Davis. I think you're a co-author, which is fantastic. So many great insights there. Robert, thank you so much. I know that you're going to be at the University of Arkansas in a bit talking to a big group there about collaboration also across cultures. It's always great connecting to you. Thank you very much for being with us, and I hope to see you very soon again.
Thank you so much for having me, Barbara. I wanted to mention just two quick things. The resources we have throughout Nomium, they're free. The book's free. The Radically Remote book that Josh wrote, I was an editor on that. That's there. The hybrid link that's on the screen right now, I also have a link to the first video in a 9-part series about hybrid facilitation. So those of you who want to get the book, awesome. If you want to watch videos or listen to me in the background because you love my voice, we've got over 90 minutes of hybrid content on YouTube available for free. And we just hope the world finds it useful. We hope that somebody says, I've been doing hybrid and I found one tip or trick that really helped me. Or other people say, I've never done hybrid, but this has given me a bit of confidence to try it out for the first time.
Thank you so much for sharing that again. Thanks a lot, Robert. And well, have a beautiful stay traveling around and doing business in the USA now.
Thank you very much. I will be back in Hong Kong, and I'll be meeting with all of my friends in Hong Kong virtually for the next month or so.
Bye. Great.
Thanks.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Virtual Space Hero community, also for providing me with all the questions ahead of the conversation with Robert. And well, stay tuned. You know that Virtual Space Hero LinkedIn Lives happen every Thursday. And next week, I will be talking about how to organize a virtual event for a multinational, for a big corporation, and how to do that with Lena Morkbag. So with that, I'm saying thank you very much again, and stay tuned, become a virtual space hero. Bye.